Panama is a country located at the southern end of Central America, border South America. It is bordered by Costa Rica to the west, Colombia to the southeast, Caribbean Sea to the north, and Pacific Ocean to the south. Its capital and largest city is Panama City, whose metropolitan area is home to nearly half of the country's over 4 million inhabitants. Before the arrival of Spanish colonists in 16th century, Panama was inhabited by several different indigenous tribes. It broke away from Spain in 1821 and joined Republic of Gran Colombia, which is a union of Nueva Granada, Ecuador, and Venezuela. After Gran Colombia dissolved in 1831, Panama and Nueva Granada eventually became Republic of Colombia. With the backing of United States, Panama seceded from Colombia in 1903, allowing the construction of Panama Canal to be completed by the United States Army Corps of Engineers between 1904 and 1914. The 1977 Torrijos-Carter treaties agreed to transfer the canal from United States to Panama on the 31st of December 1999. The surrounding territory was returned first in 1979. Revenue from canal tolls continued to represent a significant portion of Panama's GDP, especially after Panama Canal Expansion Project finished in 2016, doubled its capacity. Commerce, banking, and tourism are major sectors. Panama is regarded as having a high-income economy. Panama's jungles cover 40% of its land area, have abundant tropical plants and animals, some of which are found nowhere else on Earth.
In 2025, it was reported that over 2 million tourists visit Panama annually. In August 2025 alone, there were 194,000 visitors to Panama. This includes several 100,000 visitors from cruise ships. In 2023, 320,000 cruise ship visitors visited Panama. Most of the tourists came from United States, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Brazil, and Spain. Tourism in Panama continued to grow. In 2023, Panama attracted 2.5 million visitors, bringing $5 billion into Panama economy. Economic incentives for migrants and retirees made Panama into a relatively good place to retire. Real estate developers in Panama increased the number of tourism destinations in the past 5 years because of interest in these visitor incentives. Panama enacted Law No. 80 in 2012 to promote foreign investment in tourism, providing 100% exemption from income tax and real estate taxes for 15 years, duty-free imports for construction materials and equipment for 5 years, and capital gains tax exemption for 5 years.
Panamanian currency is officially the Balboa, fixed at a rate of 1-to-1 with United States dollar since Panamanian independence in 1903. In practice, Panama is dollarized while US dollars are legal tender and used for all paper currency. Although Panama has its own coinage, US coins are widely used. Because of the tie to US dollars, Panama has traditionally had low inflation.
Panama's location in Central America, bordering both Caribbean Sea and Pacific Ocean, between Colombia and Costa Rica, situated on the Isthmus of Panama, is strategic. By 1999, Panama controlled Panama Canal, which connects Atlantic Ocean and Caribbean Sea to the north of Pacific Ocean. Panama's total area is 74,177 square kilometers. The dominant feature of Panama's geography is the central spine of mountains and hills that form the continental divide. The division does not form part of the great mountain chains of North America, and only near the Colombian border are there highlands related to the Andean system of South America. The mountain range of the division is Cordillera de Talamanca near Costa Rican border. Farther east, it becomes Serranía de Tabasara, and portion of it closer to the lower saddle of the isthmus where Panama Canal is located is Sierra de Veraguas. As a whole, the range between Costa Rica and the canal is generally referred to by geographers as the Cordillera Central. The highest point in the country is Volcan Baru, which rises to 3,474 meters with mountain and surrounding area protected with national park status. A nearly impenetrable jungle forms the Darien Gap between Panama and Colombia, where Colombian guerrillas and drug dealers operate and sometimes take hostages. This, as well as unrest and forest protection movements, creates the only break in the Pan American Highway, which otherwise forms a complete road from Alaska to Patagonia.
Nearly 500 rivers lace Panama's rugged landscape. Mostly unnavigable, many originate as swift highland streams, meander in valleys and form coastal deltas. However, Rio Chagres, located in central Panama, is one of the few wide rivers and source of hydroelectric power. The central part of the river is dammed by Gatun Dam and forms artificial Gatun Lake that constitutes part of Panama Canal. The lake was created by the construction of Gatun Dam across Rio Chagres between 1907 and 1913. Once created, Gatun Lake was the largest man-made lake in the world and largest earth dam. The river drains northwest into the Caribbean. Campia and Madden lakes, also filled from the Rio Chagres, provide hydroelectricity for the area of the former canal zone. Rio Chipo, another source of hydroelectric power, is one of the more than 300 rivers emptying into the Pacific. These Pacific-oriented rivers are longer and slower running than those on the Caribbean side. Their basins are also more extensive. One of the longest is Rio Tuira, which flows into Golfo de San Miguel and nation's only river that is navigable by larger vessels.
Caribbean coastline is marked by several natural harbors. However, Cristobal at Caribbean terminus of the canal had the only important port facilities in the late 1980s. The numerous islands of Archipelago de Bocas del Toro near beaches of Costa Rica provide an extensive natural roadstead and shield the banana port of Almirante. The more than 350 San Blas islands near Colombia are strung out over more than 160 kilometers along the sheltered Caribbean coastline. The terminal ports located at each end of Panama Canal, namely Port of Cristobal, Colon, and Port of Balboa, are ranked second and third respectively in Latin America in terms of the number of container units handled. Port of Balboa contains 2,100 square meters of warehouse space. Excellent deep water ports capable of accommodating very large crude oil carriers are located at Charco Azul, Chiriqui, and Chiriqui Grande, Bocas del Toro near Panama's western border with Costa Rica. Trans-Panama pipeline running 131 kilometers across the isthmus, operated between Charco Azul and Chiriqui Grande since 1979.
Panama's tropical environment supports an abundance of plants. Forests dominate, interrupted in places by grasslands, scrub, and crops. Subsistence farming, widely practiced from northeastern jungles to southwestern grasslands, consists largely of corn, bean, and tuber plots. Mangrove swamps occur along parts of both coasts, with banana plantations occupying deltas near Costa Rica. In many places, a multi-canopied rainforest abuts the swamp on one side of the country and extends to the lower reaches of slopes on the other. Panama had a 2019 Forest Landscape Integrity Index mean score of 6.37/10, ranking it 78th globally out of 172 countries. Two-thirds of Panama's forests are located in indigenous territories and 25% of Panama's territory is protected. Panama has 16 national parks. Soberania National Park has the greatest diversity of birds for birdwatching, with more than 525 birds. It also has a variety of mammals such as capybaras and coyotes, reptile-like green iguana, and amphibians such as cane toad. Darien National Park, known for the Darien Gap, is the largest national park in Central America and is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Metropolitan National Park is outside Panama City, and largest island of Panama is Coiba Island Park. Harlequin Frog Festival is held every year in Panama to raise awareness, as this species is threatened by habitat destruction and pollution.
Panama has a tropical climate. Temperatures are uniformly high, as is the relative humidity, and there is little seasonal variation. Diurnal ranges are low. On a typical dry season day in the capital city, early morning minimum is 24 degrees Celsius and afternoon maximum 30 degrees Celsius. The temperature seldom exceeds 32 degrees Celsius for more than a short time. Temperatures on the Pacific side of the isthmus are somewhat lower than on the Caribbean, and breezes tend to rise after dusk in most parts of the country. Temperatures are markedly cooler in the higher parts of the mountain ranges, and frosts occur in the Cordillera de Talamanca in western Panama. Climatic regions are determined less on the basis of temperature than on rainfall, which varies regionally from less than 1,300 millimeters to more than 3,000 millimeters per year. Almost all of the rain falls during rainy season, which is usually from April to December, but varies in length from 7 to 9 months. In general, rainfall is much heavier on the Caribbean than Pacific side of the continental division, due in part to occasional tropical cyclone activity nearby. Panama is one of 3 countries in the world that are carbon negative, meaning that it absorbs more carbon dioxide than it releases into the atmosphere. The others are Bhutan and Suriname.
Since early 20th century, Panama has, with the revenues from the canal, built the largest regional financial center in Central America with consolidated assets more than 3 times that of Panama's GDP. Stability is the key strength of Panama's financial sector, which benefited from the country's favorable economic and business climate. However, Panama still cannot compare to the position held by Hong Kong or Singapore as financial centers in Asia. Panama still has a reputation worldwide for being a tax haven, but has agreed to enhance transparency, especially since the release in 2016 of the Panama Papers. Significant progress has been made to improve full compliance with anti-money laundering recommendations. Panama was removed from FATF grey list in February 2016. The European Union also removed Panama from its tax haven blacklist in 2018. However, efforts remain to be made, and the IMF repeatedly mentions the need to strengthen financial transparency and fiscal structure.
Panama is home to Tocumen International Airport, Central America's largest airport and hub for Copa Airlines, Panama's flag carrier. Additionally, there are more than 20 smaller airfields in the country. Panama's roads, traffic, and transportation systems are generally safe, though night driving is difficult and in some cases, restricted by local authorities. This usually occurs in informal settlements. Traffic in Panama moves on the right, and Panamanian law requires that drivers and passengers wear seat belts. Highways are generally well developed for a Latin American country. The Pan American Highway travels from north to south through the country, starting at the border with Costa Rica but ending short of Colombia, at an area called the Darien Gap. The Panama City area is well served by nearly 150 bus routes, publicly operated MI-bus system along with the 2 rapid transit lines of Panama Metro. Prior to the government operation of bus routes, Panama was served by privately operated buses called Diablo Rojos, meaning Red Devils, which were retired school buses from the United States painted in bright colors by their operators. The Diablo Rojos that remain are now mainly used in rural areas.
The primary export of Panama is copper ore. In 2022, copper ore export trade from Panama was valued at $3 billion. Panama's economy is also supported by trade and export of coffee and agricultural products including bananas, palm oil, cane sugar, and shrimp.
In 2025, Panama's population is 4.6 million. More than half the population lives in Panama City-Metropolitan Corridor, which spans several cities. Panama's urban population exceeds 75%, making Panama's population the most urbanized in Central America. In 2010, population was 65% mestizo, mixed white, indigenous, 12% indigenous. Most Afro-Panamanians live in the Panama-Metropolitan area, Darien Province, La Palma, and Bocas del Toro Province. Areas in Panama City with significant Afro-Panamanian influence in Rio Abajo and Casco Viejo. Black Panamanians are descendants of African slaves brought to the Americas in the Atlantic slave trade. The second wave of black people brought to Panama came from Caribbean during the construction of Panama Canal. Panama also has considerable Chinese and Indian population brought to work on the canal during its construction. Most Chinese Panamanians reside in Panama City. Chinese Panamanians compose 4% of the population of Panama. Europeans and white Panamanians are a minority in Panama, forming 6% of the population. Panama is also home to a small Arab community that has mosques and practices Islam, as well as a Jewish community and many synagogues.
Spanish is the official and dominant language. Native languages, such as Ngabura, are spoken throughout the country, mostly in their native territories. Christianity is the main religion in Panama, with the majority Roman Catholic.
Christmas parade, El Desfile de Navidad, is celebrated in the capital Panama City on December 25th. The floats in the parade are decorated in Panamanian colors and women wear dresses called pollera and men dress in traditional montuno.
Outside Panama City, regional festivals take place throughout the year featuring local musicians and dancers. Panama's traditional products are wood carvings, ceremonial masks and pottery. In earlier times, baskets were woven for utilitarian uses, but now many villages rely almost exclusively on income from the baskets they produce for tourists. A unique culture in Panama is elaborate embroidered panels mola blouse made by Gunner women that make up the front and back of a Gunner woman's blouse. They are several layers of cloth, varying in color, loosely stitched together using a reverse applique process.
Traditional cuisine of the country includes mixed ingredients of Spanish, indigenous Panamanian, and African techniques. The famous fish market known as Mercado de Mariscos offers fresh seafood and ceviche seafood dish. Many small kiosco shops along the street. Empanada is Latin American pastry filled with variety of ingredients, either meat or vegetarian, mostly fried. Pastelitos filled with meat and eaten during holiday periods. Typical Panamanian foods are mild-flavored, without the pungency of Panama's Latin American and Caribbean neighbors. Common ingredients are maize, rice, wheat flour, plantains, yuca, cassava, beef, chicken, pork, and seafood.
The Isthmus of Panama was formed 3 million years ago when the land bridge between North and South America finally complete and plants and animals gradually crossed in both directions. The earliest discovered artifacts of indigenous peoples in Panama include Paleo-Indian projectile points. Later, central Panama was home to some of the first pottery making in the Americas, Monegrillo, which dates back to 2500 to 1700 BC. Before Europeans arrived, Panama was widely settled by Chibchan, Chacoan, and Quaver peoples. The largest group were the Quaver. Austronesians had a trade network to Panama, as there is evidence of coconuts reaching the Pacific coast of Panama from the Philippines in pre-Columbian times. When Panama was colonized, indigenous peoples fled into the forest and nearby islands. Scholars believe that infectious disease was the cause of natives' population decline. The indigenous peoples had no acquired immunity to diseases such as smallpox, which had been chronic in Eurasian populations for centuries.
Rodrigo de Bastidas sailed westward from Venezuela in 1501 in search of gold and became the first European to explore the Isthmus of Panama. A year later, Christopher Columbus visited the isthmus and established a short-lived settlement in the province of Darien. Vasco Núñez de Balboa's tortuous trek from the Atlantic to the Pacific in 1513 demonstrated that the isthmus was indeed the path between the seas, and Panama quickly became the crossroads and marketplace of Spain's empire in the New World. King Ferdinand II assigned Pedro Arias de Vila as royal governor. He arrived in June 1514 with 19 vessels and 1,500 men. In 1519, de Vila founded Panama City. Gold and silver were brought by ship from South America, hauled across the isthmus and loaded aboard ships for Spain. The route known as Camino Real or Royal Road, although more commonly known as Camino de Cruces, Road of Crosses, because of the number of gravesites along the way. In 1520, the Genos controlled the port of Panama. The Genos obtained concession from the Spanish to exploit the port of Panama mainly for the slave trade until destruction of the Primeval city in 1671. In the meantime, in 1635, Don Sebastian Utodo de Corcura, governor of Panama, recruited Genos, Peruvians and Panamanians as soldiers to wage war against Muslims in the Philippines and founded the city of Zamboanga. Panama was under Spanish rule for almost 300 years from 1538 to 1821 and became part of the Viceroyalty of Peru, along with all other Spanish possessions in South America. From the outset, Panamanian identity was based on a sense of geographic destiny, and Panamanian fortunes fluctuated with the geopolitical importance of the isthmus. The colonial experience spawned Panamanian nationalism. Racially complex and highly stratified society is the source of internal conflicts that ran counter to the unifying force of nationalism. Spanish authorities had little control over much of the territory of Panama. Large sections managed to resist conquest and missionization until late in the colonial era. Because of this, indigenous people of the area were often referred to as Indios de Guerra, or Indians. However, Panama was important to Spain strategically because it was the easiest way to ship silver mined in Peru to Europe. Silver cargoes were landed on the west coast of Panama and then taken overland to Portobello or Nombre de Dios on the Caribbean side of the isthmus for further shipment. Aside from the European route, There was also an Asian American route, which led to traders and adventurers carrying silver from Peru going over land through Panama to reach Acapulco, Mexico before sailing to Manila, Philippines using the famed Manila galleons. In 1579, royal monopoly that Acapulco, Mexico had on trading with Manila, Philippines was relaxed and Panama was assigned as another port that was able to trade directly with Asia. Because of incomplete Spanish control, Panama route was vulnerable to attack from pirates, mostly Dutch and English, and New World African Cimarrons who freed themselves from enslavement and lived in communes or palenques around Camino Real in Panama's interior and islands off Panama's Pacific coast. One such famous community amounted to a small kingdom under Baeno which emerged in the 1552 to 1558 period. Sir Francis Drake's famous raids on Panama from 1572 to 1573 and John Oxenham's crossing to the Pacific Ocean were aided by Panama Cimarrons, and Spanish authorities were only able to bring them under control by making an alliance with them that guaranteed their freedom in exchange for military support in 1582. The following elements help define a distinctive sense of autonomy and regional or national identity within Panama well before the rest of the colonies. Prosperity enjoyed during the first 2 centuries from 1540 to 1740 while contributing to colonial growth, placing of extensive regional judicial authority as part of its jurisdiction and pivotal role it played at the height of Spanish Empire, the first modern global empire. Panama was the site of the ill-fated Darien scheme which set up a Scottish colony in the region in 1698. This failed for a number of reasons and ensuing debt contributed to the Union of England and Scotland in 1707. In 1671, privateer Henry Morgan, licensed by English government, sacked and burned the city of Panama, which was the second most important city in Spanish New World at that time. In 1717, Viceroyalty of New Granada, northern South America, was created in response to other Europeans trying to take Spanish territory in the Caribbean region. The Isthmus of Panama was placed under its jurisdiction. However, the remoteness of New Granada's capital, Santa Fe de Bogotá, modern capital of Colombia, proved a greater obstacle than the Spanish crown anticipated, as the authority of New Granada was contested by seniority, closer proximity, and previous ties to the Viceroyalty of Peru, and even by Panama's own initiative. This uneasy relationship between Panama and Bogotá persists for centuries. In 1744, Bishop Francisco Javier de Luna Victoria de Castro established the College of San Ignacio de Loyola, and on the 3rd of June 1749, founded La Real Pontificia Universidad de San Javier. By this time, however, Panama's importance and influence become insignificant as Spain's power dwindled in Europe and advances in navigation technique increasingly permitted ships to round Cape Horn in order to reach the Pacific. While the Panama route was short, it was also labor-intensive and expensive because of the loading and unloading and laden-down trek required to get from the one coast to the other.
In the 80 years following its independence from Spain, Panama was a subdivision of Gran Colombia, after voluntarily joining the country at the end of 1821. It then became part of the Republic of New Granada in 1831 and was divided into several provinces. In 1855, the autonomous state of Panama was created within the Republic out of the New Granada provinces of Panama, Azuero, Chiriquí, and Veraguas. It continued as a state in the Granadine Confederation from 1858 to 1863 and United States of Colombia from 1863 to 1886. The 1886 Constitution of the modern Republic of Colombia created a new Panama department. The people of the Isthmus made over 80 attempts to secede from Colombia. They came close to success in 1831, then again during the Thousand Days War of 1899 to 1902, understood among indigenous Panamanians as a struggle for land rights under the leadership of Victoriano Lorenzo. The United States influence led to the secession of Panama from Colombia in 1903 and its political independence. When the Senate of Colombia rejected the Hay-Heron Treaty on the 22nd of January 1903, United States decided to support and encourage the Panamanian secessionist movement. In November 1903, Panam, tacitly supported by the United States, proclaimed its independence and concluded the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty with the United States. In 1914, United States completed the existing 83-kilometer-long canal. From 1903 to 1968, Panama was a constitutional democracy dominated by a commercially oriented oligarchy. During the 1950s, Panama Panamanian military began to challenge the oligarchy's political hegemony. The early 1960s also saw the beginning of sustained pressure in Panama for the renegotiation of the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty, including riots that broke out in early 1964, resulting in widespread looting and dozens of deaths, and the evacuation of the American embassy.
Amid negotiations for the Robles-Johnson Treaty, Panama held elections in 1968.
Ecuador is a country in northwestern South America, bordered by Colombia on the north, Peru on the east and south, and Pacific Ocean on the west. It also includes Galapagos Province, which contains the Galapagos Islands in the Pacific, about 1,000 kilometers west of the mainland. The country's capital is Quito, and its largest city is Guayaquil. The land that comprises modern-day Ecuador was once home to several groups of indigenous peoples that were gradually incorporated into the Inca Empire during 15th century. The territory was colonized by Spanish Empire during 16th century, achieving independence in 1820 as part of Gran Colombia, from which it emerged as a sovereign state in 1830. The legacy of both empires is reflected in Ecuador's ethnically diverse population, with most of its 17.8 million people being mestizos, followed by large minorities of Europeans, Native American, African, and Asian descendants. Spanish is the official language spoken by majority of the population, although 13 native languages are also recognized, including Quechua and Shuar. Ecuador is a plurinational representative democratic presidential republic and developing country whose economy is highly dependent on exports of commodities, primarily petroleum and agricultural products. One of 17 megadiverse countries in the world, Ecuador hosts many endemic plants and animals, such as those of the Galapagos Islands. In recognition of its unique ecological heritage, the new Constitution of 2008 is the first in the world to recognize legally enforceable rights of nature. In 2024 Global Hunger Index, Ecuador ranks 58th out of 127 countries.
Various people had settled in the area that would become Ecuador before the arrival of the Incas. The archaeological evidence suggests that Paleo-Indians' first dispersal into the Americas occurred near the end of last glacial period 16,500 to 13,000 years ago. The first people to reach Ecuador may have journeyed by land from North and Central America or by boat along Pacific Ocean coastline. Even though their languages were unrelated, these groups developed similar groups of cultures, each based in different environments. The people of the coast combined agriculture with fishing, hunting, and gathering. The people of highland Andes developed a sedentary agricultural way of life, and peoples of Amazon basin relied on hunting and gathering. In some cases, this is combined with agriculture and arboriculture. Many civilizations arose in Ecuador, such as Valdivia culture and Mochilila culture on the coast, Cuitas near present-day Quito and Canary near present-day Cuenca. By 250 BC, these civilizations in Ecuador came in contact with Austronesian explorers from Southeast Asia who brought with them Pacific coconut, and there was pre-Columbian trade and exchanges with Austronesians. In highland Andes mountains, where life was more sedentary, groups of tribes cooperated and formed villages. Thus, the first nations based on agricultural resources and domestication of animals formed. Eventually, through wars and marriage alliances of their leaders, groups of nations formed confederations. When the Incas arrived, they found that these confederations were so developed that it took the Incas 2 generations of rulers, Topa Inca Yupanqui and Huayna Capac, to absorb them into the Inca Empire. People belonging to the confederations that gave them most problems were deported to distant areas of Peru, Bolivia, and North Argentina. Similarly, a number of loyal Inca subjects from Peru and Bolivia were brought to Ecuador to prevent rebellion. Thus, the region of highland Ecuador became part of Inca Empire in 1463, sharing same language. In contrast, when the Incas made incursions into coastal Ecuador and eastern Amazon jungles of Ecuador, they found both the environment and indigenous people more hostile. Moreover, when the Incas tried to subdue them, these indigenous people withdrew to the interior and resorted to guerrilla tactics. As a result, Inca expansion into the Amazon basin and Pacific coast of Ecuador was hampered. The indigenous people of Amazon jungle and coastal Ecuador remained relatively autonomous until Spanish soldiers and missionaries arrived in force. The Amazonian people and Cayapas of coastal Ecuador were the only groups to resist both Inca and Spanish domination, maintaining their languages and cultures well into the 21st century. Before the arrival of Spaniards, Inca Empire was involved in a civil war. The untimely death of both the heir Ninan Cuyochi and Emperor Huayna Capac, from a European disease that spread into Ecuador, created a power vacuum between two factions and led to a civil war. The army stationed north headed by Atahualpa marched south to Cusco and massacred the royal family associated with his brother. In 1532, a small band of Spaniards headed by Francisco Pizarro reached Cajamarca and lured Atahualpa into a trap, Battle of Cajamarca. Pizarro promised to release Atahualpa if he made good his promise of filling a room full of gold. But, after a mock trial, Spaniards executed Atahualpa by strangulation.
New infectious diseases such as smallpox, endemic to the Europeans, caused high fatalities among Amerindian population during the first decades of Spanish rule, as they had no immunity. At the same time, natives were forced into encomienda labor system for Spanish. In 1563, Quito became the seat of a real audiencia, administrative district, of Spain and part of Viceroyalty of Peru and later Viceroyalty of New Granada. The 1797 Riobamba earthquake, which caused up to 40,000 casualties, was studied by Alexander von Humboldt when he visited the area between 1801 and 1802. After nearly 300 years of Spanish rule, Quito still remained small with a population of 10,000 people. On the 10th of August 1809, the city's criollos called for independence from Spain, first among the peoples of Latin America. They were led by Juan Pío Montufo, Quiroga, Salinas, and Bishop Cuero y Caicedo. Quito's nickname Light of America is based on its leading role in trying to secure an independent, local government. Although the new government lasted no more than 2 months, it had important repercussions and was an inspiration for independence movement of the rest of Spanish America. Today, the 10th of August is celebrated as Independence Day, a national holiday.
Ecuador abolished slavery in 1851. The Liberal Revolution of 1895 under Eloy Alfaro reduced the power of clergy and conservative landowners. This liberal wing retained power until the military Julian Revolution of 1925. The 1930s and 1940s were marked by instability and emergence of populist politicians, such as 5-time President José María Velasco Ibarra. Ecuador separated from Colombia on the 13th of May 1830.
In 1941, amid fast-growing tensions within disputed territories around Zaramilla River, war broke out with Peru. Peru claimed that Ecuador's military presence in Peruvian claimed territory was an invasion. Ecuador, for its part, claimed that Peru had recently invaded Ecuador around Zaramilla River and that Peru since Ecuador's independence from Spain has systematically occupied Tumbes, Jaén and most of the disputed territories in the Amazonian basin between Putumayo and Marañón rivers. In July 1941, troops were mobilized in both countries. Peru had an army of 11,681 troops who faced poorly supplied and inadequately armed Ecuadorian force of 2,300, of which only 1,300 were deployed in the southern provinces. Hostilities erupted on the 5th of July 1941, when Peruvian forces crossed the Zaramilla River at several locations, testing the strength and resolve of Ecuadorian border troops. Finally, on the 23rd of July 1941, Peruvians launched a major invasion, crossing the Zaramilla River in force and advancing into Ecuadorian province of El Oro.
During the course of Ecuadorian-Peruvian War, Peru gained control over part of the disputed territory and parts of the provinces of El Oro and Loya, demanding that Ecuadorian government give up its territorial claims. The Peruvian Navy blocked the port of Guayaquil, almost cutting all supplies to Ecuadorian troops. After few weeks of war and under pressure by the United States and several Latin American nations, all fighting came to a stop. Ecuador and Peru came to an accord formalized in Rio Protocol, signed on the 29th of January 1942, in favor of hemispheric unity against the Axis powers in World War II, favoring Peru with the territory they occupied at the time the war came to an end. The 1944 Glorious May Revolution followed military-civilian rebellion and subsequent civic strike which successfully removed Carlos Arroyo del Rio as dictator from Ecuador's government. However, a post-Second World War recession and popular unrest led to a return to populist politics and domestic military interventions in the 1960s, while foreign companies developed oil resources in the Ecuadorian Amazon. In 1972, construction of the Andean pipeline was completed. The pipeline brought oil from the east side of the Andes to the coast, making Ecuador South America's second largest oil exporter.
The Rio Protocol failed to precisely resolve the border along a little river in the remote Cordillera del Condor region in southern Ecuador. This caused a long simmering dispute between Ecuador and Peru, which ultimately led to fighting between the two countries. First, a border skirmish between January to February 1981 known as Paquisha Incident, and ultimately full-scale warfare in January 1995 where Ecuadorian military shot down Peruvian aircraft and helicopters and Peruvian infantry marched into southern Ecuador. Each country blamed the other for the onset of hostilities, known as Cenipa War. Sixto Durán Ballén, Ecuadorian president, famously declared that he would not give up a single centimeter of Ecuador. Popular sentiment in Ecuador became strongly nationalistic against Peru. Graffiti could be seen on the walls of Quito referring to Peru as Cain de Latino America, a reference to the murder of Abel by his brother Cain in the Book of Genesis. Ecuador and Peru signed the Brasilia Presidential Act peace agreement on the 26th of October 1998, which ended hostilities and effectively put an end to the Western Hemisphere's longest-running territorial dispute. The guarantors of Rio Protocol, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and the United States of America, ruled that the border of the undelineated zone to be set at the line of Cordillera del Condor. While Ecuador had to give up its decades-old territorial claims to the eastern slopes of the Cordillera, as well as to the entire western area of Cenipa headwaters, Peru was compelled to give to Ecuador, in perpetual lease but without sovereignty, 1 square kilometers of its territory, in the area where the Ecuadorian base of Tuwinza, focal point of the war, had been located within Peruvian soil and which Ecuadorian army held during the conflict. The final border demarcation came into effect on the 13th of May 1999, and multinational military observer mission for Ecuador and Peru troop deployment withdrew on the 17th of June 1999.
In 1972, a revolutionary and nationalist military junta overthrew the government of Velasco Ibarra. The coup d'etat was led by General Guillermo Rodriguez and executed by Navy Commander Jorge Cairolo G. The new president exiled José María Velasco to Argentina. He remained in power until 1976, when he was removed by another military government. That military junta was led by Admiral Alfredo Poveda, who was declared chairman of Supreme Council. The Supreme Council included 2 other members, General Guillermo Durán Arcentales and General Luis Pintado. The civil society more and more insistently called for democratic elections. Colonel Richelieu Lavoie, government minister, proposed and implemented a plan to return to the constitutional system through universal elections. This plan enabled the new democratically elected president to assume the duties of the executive office.
Elections were held on the 29th of April 1979. Under a new constitution, Jaime Roldos Aguilera was elected president, garnering over 1 million votes, the most in Ecuadorian history. He took office on the 10th of August as the first constitutionally elected president after nearly a decade of civilian and military dictatorships. In 1980, he founded Partido Pueblo, People, Change and Democracy Party, after withdrawing from Popular Forces concentration. He governed until the 24th of May 1981, when he died along with his wife and Minister of Defense Marco Subia Martinez, when his Air Force plane crashed in heavy rain near Peruvian border. Roldos was immediately succeeded by Vice President Osvaldo Utodo. In 1984, Leon Febres Cordero from Social Christian Party was elected president. Rodrigo Borja Ceballos of Democratic Left Party won the presidency in 1988, winning the runoff election against Abdullah Bucaram, brother-in-law of Jaime Roldos and founder of Ecuadorian Roldosist Party. His government was committed to improving human rights protection and carried out some reforms, notably an opening of Ecuador to foreign trade. The Borja government negotiated the disbanding of the small terrorist group, Alfaro Vive, Carajo, named after Eloy Alfaro. However, continuing economic problems undermined the popularity of the ID party, and opposition parties gained control of Congress in 1999.
A notable event was the Cenepa War fought between Ecuador and Peru in 1995. Ecuador won its first Olympic medal in the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta when Jefferson Perez won gold in the 20 km walk. Ecuador adopted the US dollar on the 13th of April 2000 as its national currency, and on the 11th of September, the country eliminated the Ecuadorian sucre in order to stabilize the country's economy. The US dollar has been the only official currency of Ecuador since then. The emergence of the Amerindian population as an active constituency has added to the democratic volatility of the country in recent years. The population has been motivated by government failures to deliver on promises of land reform, lower unemployment and provision of social services, and the historical exploitation by the landholding elite. Their movement, along with the continuing destabilizing efforts by both the elite and leftist movements, has led to a deterioration of the executive office. The populace and the other branches of government give the president very little political capital, as illustrated by the most recent removal of President Lucio Gutierrez from office by Congress in April 2005. Vice President Alfredo Palacio took his place. In the election of 2006, Rafael Correa gained the presidency. In January 2007, several left-wing political leaders of Latin America, his future allies, attended his swearing-in ceremony. Endorsed in a 2008 referendum, a new constitution implemented leftist reforms. In December 2008, Correa declared Ecuador's national debt illegitimate, based on the argument that it was odious debt contracted by prior corrupt and despotic regimes. He announced that the country would default on over $3 billion worth of bonds, and he succeeded in reducing the price of outstanding bonds by more than 60% by fighting creditors in international courts. He brought Ecuador into the Bolivarian Alliance for the Americas in June 2009. Correa's administration reduced the high levels of poverty and unemployment in Ecuador. Correa's 3 consecutive terms from 2007 to 2017 were followed by his former Vice President Lenín Moreno's 4 years as president, 2017 to 21. After being elected in 2017, President Moreno's government adopted economically liberal policies, such as reduction of public spending, trade liberalization, and flexibility of the labor code. Ecuador also left the left-wing Bolivarian Alliance for the Americas in August 2018. The Productive Development Act introduced an austerity policy, and reduced the previous development and redistribution policies. Regarding taxes, the authorities aim to encourage the return of investors by granting amnesty to fraudsters and proposing measures to reduce tax rates for large companies. In addition, the government waived the right to tax increases in raw material prices and foreign exchange repatriations. In October 2018, Moreno cut diplomatic relations with the Maduro administration of Venezuela, a close ally of Correa. The relations with the United States improved significantly under Moreno. In June 2019, Ecuador agreed to allow U.S. military planes to operate from an airport on the Galapagos Islands. In February 2020, his visit to Washington was the first meeting between an Ecuadorian and U.S. president in 17 years. A series of protests began on the 3rd of October 2019 against the end of fuel subsidies and austerity measures adopted by Moreno. On the 10th of October, protesters overran Quito capital, causing the government of Ecuador to relocate temporarily to Guayaquil. The government eventually returned to Quito in 2019. On the 14th of October 2019, the government restored fuel subsidies and withdrew an austerity package, which ended nearly 2 weeks of protests.
On the 23rd of November 2023, Noboa was sworn in. In January 2024, Noboa declared an internal armed conflict against organized crime in response to the escape of the imprisoned leader of the Los Llaneros cartel and terrorist group, José Adolfo Macias Villamofito, and an armed attack at a public television channel. In April 2025, President Daniel Noboa won the runoff round of Ecuador's presidential election, meaning he will now serve a full 4-year term. In June 2025, Fito was recaptured and extradited to the United States to face charges of international cocaine distribution conspiracy, use of firearms in furtherance of drug trafficking and straw purchasing of firearms conspiracy. Fito pled not guilty to all charges and is currently awaiting conviction. In October 2025, 5 people were arrested following an alleged assassination attempt on President Daniel Noboa.
Ecuador is a country with vast natural wealth. The diversity of its 4 regions has given rise to thousands of species of flora and fauna. It has 1,640 kinds of birds. The species of butterflies border 4,500, reptiles 345, amphibians 358, and mammals 258. Ecuador is considered one of the 17 countries where the planet's highest biodiversity is concentrated, being also the largest country with diversity per square kilometer in the world. Most of its fauna and flora live in 26 protected areas by the state. The country has 2 cities with UNESCO World Heritage Sites, Quito and Cuenca, as well as 2 natural UNESCO World Heritage Sites, Galapagos Islands and Sangay National Park, in addition to 1 World Biosphere Reserve, such as Carjas Massif. Culturally, Tequila straw hat and culture of the Zapara indigenous people are recognized. The most popular sites for national and foreign tourists have different nuances due to the various tourist activities offered by the country. Among the main tourist destinations are nature attractions in Galapagos Islands, Yasuni National Park, El Carjas National Park, Sangay National Park, Podocarpus National Park, Vilcabamba, Bonias de Agua Santa. Cultural attractions are Historic Center of Quito, Ciudad Mitad del Mundo, Ingapirca, Historic Center of Cuenca, Latacunga, and its Mama Negra Festival. Snowy mountains are Antisana Volcano, Cayambe Volcano, Chimborazo Volcano, Cotopaxi Volcano, Ilanizas Volcanoes. Beaches are Atacames, Bahia de Caracas, Crucita, Esmeraldas, Manta, Montanita, Playas, Salinas.
Ecuador was placed 96th position of innovation in technology in 2013 World Economic Forum study. Ecuador was ranked 113 road in the Global Innovation Index in 2025. The most notable icons in Ecuadorian sciences are mathematician and cartographer Pedro Vicente Maldonado, born in Riobamba in 1707, and printer, independence precursor and medical pioneer Eugenio Espejo, born in 1747 in Quito. Other notable Ecuadorian scientists and engineers are Lieutenant José Rodríguez Labandera, a pioneer who built the first submarine in Latin America in 1837, Reynaldo Espinosa Ogalar, a botanist and biologist of Andean flora, and José Aurelio Duenas, a chemist and inventor of a method of textile serigraphy. The major areas of scientific research in Ecuador have been in the medical fields, tropical and infectious diseases treatments, agricultural engineering, pharmaceutical research, and bioengineering. Being a small country and a consumer of foreign technology, Ecuador has favored research supported by entrepreneurship in information technology. The antivirus program Check Program, banking protection system MD Lock, and core banking software Cobis are products of Ecuadorian development.
Ecuadorian cuisine is diverse, varying with the altitude, associated agricultural and environmental conditions, and ethnic, racial communities. Most regions in Ecuador follow the traditional 3-course meal of soup, a course that includes rice and protein and then dessert and coffee to finish. Agricultural products from the plantations of the Costa, Sierra, and Orient regions are bananas, cocoa beans, coffee, sugar, potatoes, corn, barley, rice, wheat, and tropical fruits. In the coastal region, seafood is prevalent, with prepared fish, shrimps, and ceviche being an integral part of the diet. Beef is also notably consumed in the coastal region. Traditional dishes are carrasco and arroz con menestra y carne asada, rice with beans and grilled beef, served with fried plantain. The latter is an emblematic dish of the city of Guayaquil. Meat-based dishes have their origins in the cattle ranching culture of the Montubio people. Ceviche is a staple coastal dish with pre-Incan origins. It is often served with fried plantain, chiffle or patacones, popcorn, or tostado. Plantain and peanut-based dishes are quite frequent in the coastal region, reflecting the West African roots of many of its citizens. Encocados, dishes that contain a coconut sauce, are also very popular in the northern coast, centering around the city of Esmeraldas. The coast is also a leading producer of bananas, cocoa beans, prepared fish, shrimps, tilapia, mango, and passion fruit, among other tropical fruits. Pan de yuca, analogous with the Brazilian powder queijo, is served with yoga persa and is often eaten as a snack in many coastal cities. Its origin comes from the Persian and Arab populations that settled on the coastal regions of Ecuador and Argentina. In the Amazon region, a dietary staple is the yuca, elsewhere called cassava. Many fruits are available in this region, including bananas, tree grapes, and peach palms. In the highland region, various dishes of pork, chicken, and kiwi, guinea pig, popular, and are usually served with a variety of grains, especially rice, mote, and potatoes. The consumption of kiwi is prevalent among the indigenous peoples of Ecuador, and reflects the predominantly native character of the highlands. Colombia is a country located in South America with insular regions in North America. Colombia's mainland is bordered by Caribbean Sea to the north, Venezuela to the east, Brazil to the southeast, Peru and Ecuador to the south and southwest, Pacific Ocean to the west and Panama to the northwest. Colombia is divided into 32 departments. The capital district of Bogotá is the country's largest city, hosting main financial and cultural hub. Other urban areas include Medellín, Cali, Barranquilla, Cartagena, Bucaramanga, Pereira, Santa Marta, Cúcuta, Ibagué, Villavicencio and Manizales. It covers an area of 1,141,748 square kilometers and has a population of 52 million. Its rich cultural heritage, including language, religion, cuisine, and art, reflects its history as a colony, fusing cultural elements brought by immigration from Europe and Middle East with those brought by the African diaspora, as well as indigenous civilizations that predate colonization. Spanish is the official language, although Creole, English, and 64 other languages are recognized regionally. Colombia is home to many indigenous peoples and cultures since 12,000 BCE. Spanish landed in La Guajira in 1499 and by mid-16th century had colonized much of present-day Colombia and established New Kingdom of Granada. Independence from Spanish Empire declared in 1810, with what is now Colombia emerging as United Provinces of New Granada. After Spanish reconquest, Colombian independence was secured and Gran Colombia period began in 1819. The new polity experimented with federalism as the Granadine Confederation and then the United States of Colombia in 1863, before becoming a centralized republic in 1886. With the backing of United States and France, Panama seceded from Colombia in 1903, resulting in Colombia's present borders. Beginning in the 1960s, the country suffered from an asymmetric low-intensity armed conflict and political violence, both of which escalated in the 1990s. Since 2000, there has improvement in security, stability and rule of law, as well as economic growth and development. Colombia is recognized for its healthcare system, being the best healthcare in the Americas according to the World Health Organization. Its diversified economy is the third largest in South America, with macroeconomic stability and favorable long-term growth prospects. The country is one of the most progressive in the world in LGBT rights, gender equality, animal rights and human rights. Colombia is one of the world's 17 megadiverse countries. It has the highest level of biodiversity per square mile in the world, and second highest level overall. Its territory encompasses the Amazon rainforest, highlands, grasslands and deserts.
The geography of Colombia is characterized by 6 main natural regions that present their unique characteristics from Andes mountain range region, Pacific coastal region, Caribbean coastal region, Llanos plains, Amazon rainforest region to the insular area comprising islands in both Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It shares its maritime limits with Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Jamaica, Haiti, and Dominican Republic. East of the Andes lies savanna of Llanos, part of Orinoco River Basin, and in the far southeast is the jungle of Amazon rainforest. Together these lowlands make up over half Colombia's territory, but they have less than 6% of the population. To the north, Caribbean coast is home to 22% of the population and location of major port cities of Barranquilla and Cartagena, generally consisting of low-lying plains, but also Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta mountain range, which includes the country's tallest peaks, Pico Cristobal Colon and Pico Simon Bolivar, and La Guajira Desert. The principal Pacific port is Buenaventura.
Part of Ring of Fire, a region of the world subject to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, Andes in the interior of Colombia are the prevailing geographical feature. Most of Colombia's population centers are located in these interior highlands. Beyond Colombian Massif in the southwest of Cauca and Nariño, these are divided into 3 branches known as Cordilleras mountain ranges. Cordillera Occidental running adjacent to Pacific coast includes city of Cali. Cordillera Central running between Cauca and Magdalena River valleys to the west and east includes cities of Medellín, Manizales, Pereira, Armenia, and Cordillera Oriental extending northeast to Guajira Peninsula including Bogotá, Bucaramanga, and Cúcuta. Peaks in the Cordillera Occidental exceed 4,700 meters and reach 5,000 meters in Cordillera Central and Cordillera Oriental. At 2,600 meters, Bogotá is the highest city of its size in the world. The main rivers of Colombia are Magdalena, Cauca, Guaviare, Atrato, Meta, Putumayo, and Caqueta.
The climate of Colombia is characterized tropical, presenting variations within 6 natural regions and depending on the altitude, temperature, humidity, winds, and rainfall. Colombia has a diverse range of climate zones including tropical rainforests, savannas, steppes, deserts, and mountain climates. Mountain climate is one of the unique features of the Andes and other high altitude where climate is determined by elevation. Below 1,000 meters in elevation is warm altitudinal zone where temperatures are above 24 degrees Celsius. About 82% of the country's total area lies in the warm altitudinal zone. The temperate climate altitudinal zone located between 1,000 and 2,000 meters has average temperature between 17 and 24 degrees Celsius. The cold climate is between 2,000 and 3,000 meters with temperatures vary between 12 and 17 degrees Celsius. Beyond lies the alpine conditions of the forested zone and treeless grasslands of the Paramos. Above 4,000 meters where temperatures are below freezing, the climate is glacial, a zone of permanent snow and ice.
Colombia is one of the megadiverse countries in biodiversity, ranking first in bird species. The country has between 40,000 and 45,000 plant species, equivalent to 20% of total global species, which is even more remarkable given that Colombia is considered a country of intermediate size. Colombia has 2,000 species marine fish and second most diverse country in freshwater fish. It also has the most endemic species of butterflies. It is first in orchid species and has 7,000 species of beetles. Colombia has a high crime rate due to being a center for the cultivation and trafficking of cocaine. Throughout the times, there have been a variety of architectural styles, from those of indigenous peoples to contemporary ones, passing through colonial, military and religious, republican, transition and modern styles. Ancient habitation areas, longhouses, crop terraces, roads as the Inca road system, cemeteries, hypogeums and necropolises are all part of the architectural heritage of indigenous peoples. Pre-ceramic and ceramic archaeological site of Tequendama. Tierra Dentro Park that contains the largest concentration of pre-Columbian monumental shaft tombs with side chambers. The largest collection of religious monuments and megalithic sculptures in South America located in San Agustin, Huila. Lost City, an archaeological site with a series of terraces carved into the mountainside, a net of tiled roads and several circular plazas. The large village is mainly built with stone, wood, cane, and mud. Architecture during the period of conquest and colonization is derived from adapting European styles to local conditions, and Spanish influence, especially Andalusian and Extremaduran, can be easily seen. When Europeans founded cities, two things were happening simultaneously. The dimensioning of geometrical space, town square, street, and the location of a tangible point of orientation. The construction of forts was common throughout Caribbean and interior cities because of the dangers posed to Spanish colonial settlements from English, French and Dutch pirates and hostile indigenous groups. Churches, chapels, schools, and hospitals belonging to religious orders have a great urban influence. Baroque architecture is used in military buildings and public spaces. Marcelino Arroyo, Francisco José de Caldas and Domingo de Petres were great neoclassical architects. The national capital is a great representative of Romanticism. Wood was extensively used in doors, windows, railings, and ceilings during the colonization of Antioquia. The Caribbean architecture acquires a strong Arabic influence. The Teatro Colón in Bogotá is a lavish example of architecture from the 19th century. The Quintas houses with innovations in the volumetric conception are best examples of the Republican architecture. The Republican action in the city focused on the design of three types of spaces: parks with forests, small urban parks and avenues. The Gothic style was most commonly used for the design of churches. Deco style, modern neoclassicism, eclecticism, folklorist, and Art Deco ornamental resources significantly influenced the architecture of Colombia, especially during the transition period. Modernism contributed with new construction technologies and new materials: steel, reinforced concrete, glass and synthetic materials, and the topology architecture and light and slab system also have a great influence. The most influential architects of the modern movement were Rogelio Salmona and Fernando Martinez Sanabria. The contemporary architecture of Colombia is designed to give greater importance to the materials. This architecture takes into account the specific natural and artificial geographies and is also an architecture that appeals to the senses. The conservation of the architectural and urban heritage of Colombia has been promoted in recent years.
Colombia's varied cuisine is influenced by its diverse fauna and flora as well as the cultural traditions of the ethnic groups. Colombian dishes and ingredients vary widely by region. Some of the most common ingredients are cereals such as rice and maize, tubers such as potato and cassava, assorted legumes, meats, including beef, chicken, pork and goat, fish, and seafood. Colombia cuisine also features a variety of tropical fruits such as Cape gooseberry, figeo, araza, dragon fruit, mangostino, granadilla, papaya, guava, mora, blackberry, lulo, soursop, and passion fruit. Colombia is one of the world's largest consumers of fruit juices. Among the most representative appetizers and soups are patacones, fried green plantains, sancocho de gallina, chicken soup with root vegetables, and ajiaco, potato and corn soup. Representative snacks and breads are pan de bono, arpa, corn cakes, aborrajados, fried sweet plantains with cheese, torta de choclo, empanadas, and almajabanas. Representative main courses are bandeja paisa, lechona tolaments, mamona, tamales, and fish dishes, such as arroz de lisa, especially in coastal regions where kiba, suero, costino cheese, and caraminolas are also eaten. Representative side dishes are papas chorreadas, potatoes with cheese, remolachas rellenas con huevo duro, beets stuffed with hard-boiled egg, and arroz con coco, coconut rice. Organic food is a current trend in big cities, although in general across the country the fruits and veggies are very natural and fresh. Representative desserts are buñuelos, natillas, Maria Luisa cake, bocadillo made of guayaba, guava jelly, cocodas, coconut balls, casquitos de guayaba, candied guava peels, torta de natas, arblias, flan de mango, roscan, milhoja, manjar blanco, dulce de figio, dulce de papayuela, torta de mojicon, and esponjado de curaba. Typical sauces, salsas, are hogao, tomato and onion sauce, and Colombian-style oji. Some representative beverages are coffee, tinto, champas, chelado, lulada, avena Colombia, sugarcane juice, agua panela, aguardiente, hot chocolate, and fresh fruit juices, often made with water or milk.
Owing to its location, the present territory of Colombia was a corridor of early human civilization from Mesoamerica and the Caribbean to the Andes and Amazon basin. The oldest archaeological finds are from the Pubenza and El Tachumo sites in the Magdalena Valley 100 kilometers southwest of Bogotá. These sites date from the Paleo-Indian period, 18,000 to 8,000 BCE.
Alonso de Ojeda, who had sailed with Columbus, reached the Guadalajara Peninsula in 1499. Spanish explorers, led by Rodrigo de Bastidas, made the first exploration of the Caribbean coast in 1500. Christopher Columbus navigated near the Caribbean in 1502. In 1508, Vasco Núñez de Balboa accompanied an expedition to the territory through the region of Gulf of Urabá and founded the town of Santa Maria la Antigua del Darien in 1510, the first stable settlement on the continent. Santa Marta was founded in 1525 and Cartagena in 1533. Spanish conquistador Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada led an expedition to the interior in April 1536 and christened the districts through which he passed New Kingdom of Granada. In August 1538, he provisionally founded its capital near the Muisca Cacicazgo of Muiquita and named it Santa Fe de Bogotá. German conquistador Nicolaus Federmann crossed the Llanos Orientals and went over the Cordillera Oriental in a search for El Dorado, City of Gold. The legend and gold would play a pivotal role in luring the Spanish and other Europeans to New Granada during the 16th and 17th centuries. The conquistadors made frequent alliances with the enemies of different indigenous communities. Indigenous allies were crucial to conquest, as well as to creating and maintaining empire. Indigenous peoples in Colombia experienced a decline in population due to conquest as well as Eurasian diseases, such as smallpox, to which they had no immunity. Regarding the land as deserted, Spanish Crown sold properties to all persons interested in colonized territories, creating large farms and possession of mines. In the 16th century, nautical science in Spain reached a great development thanks to numerous scientific figures of the Casa de Contratación, and nautical science was an essential pillar of the Iberian expansion. In 1542, the region of New Granada, along with all other Spanish possessions in South America, became part of the Viceroyalty of Peru, with its capital in Lima.
In the 16th century, European slave traders had begun to bring enslaved Africans to the Americas. Spain was the only European power that did not establish factories in Africa to purchase slaves. The Spanish Empire instead relied on the asiento system, awarding merchants from other European nations the license to trade enslaved peoples to their overseas territories. This system brought Africans to Colombia, although many spoke out against the institution. The indigenous peoples could not be enslaved because they were legally subjects of the Spanish crown. To protect the indigenous peoples, several forms of land ownership and regulation were established by the Spanish colonial authorities. However, secret anti-Spanish discontentment was already brewing for Colombians since Spain prohibited direct trade between the Viceroyalty of Peru, which included Colombia, and Viceroyalty of New Spain, which included the Philippines, the source of Asian products like silk and porcelain which was in demand in the Americas. Illegal trade between Peruvians, Filipinos, and Mexicans continued in secret, as smuggled Asian goods ended up in Córdoba, Colombia, the distribution center for illegal Asian imports, due to the collusion between these peoples against the authorities in Spain. They settled and traded with each other while disobeying the forced Spanish monopoly.
Great Britain declared war on Spain in 1739, and the city of Cartagena quickly became a top target for the British. A massive British expeditionary force was dispatched to capture the city, but, after achieving initial inroads, devastating outbreaks of disease crippled their numbers, and the British were forced to withdraw. The battle became one of Spain's most decisive victories in the conflict, and secured Spanish dominance in the Caribbean until the 7 Years' War. The 18th-century priest, botanist, and mathematician José Celestino Mutis was delegated by Viceroy Antonio Caballero y Góngora to conduct an inventory of the nature of New Granada. Started in 1783, this became known as the Royal Botanical Expedition to New Granada. It classified plants and wildlife, and founded the first astronomical observatory in the city of Santa Fe de Bogotá. In July 1801, the Prussian scientist Alexander von Humboldt reached Santa Fe de Bogotá, where he met with Mutis. In addition, historical figures in the process of independence in New Granada emerged from the expedition, as the astronomer Francisco José de Caldas, the scientist Francisco Antonio Z, the zoologist Jorge Tadeo Lozano, and the painter Salvador Rizzo.
Rebellions against Spanish rule had occurred in the empire since the advent of conquest and colonization, but most were either crushed or remained too weak to change the overall situation. The last one that sought outright independence from Spain sprang up around 1810 and culminated in the Colombian Declaration of Independence, issued on the 20th of July 1810, the day that is now celebrated as the nation's Independence Day. This movement followed the independence of Saint-Domingue, present-day Haiti, in 1804, which provided some support to an eventual leader of this rebellion, Simon Bolívar. Francisco de Paula Santander also would play a decisive role. A movement was initiated by Antonio Nariño, who opposed Spanish centralism and led the opposition against the Viceroyalty. 99, Cartagena became independent in November 1811. In 1811, the United Provinces of New Granada were proclaimed, headed by Camilo Torres Tenorio. The emergence of two distinct ideological currents among the patriots, federalism and centralism, gave rise to a period of instability called the Patria Boba. Shortly after the Napoleonic Wars ended, Ferdinand VII, recently restored to the throne in Spain, unexpectedly decided to send military forces to retake most of northern South America. The Viceroyalty was restored under the command of Juan de Somono, whose regime punished those who participated in the patriotic movements, ignoring the political nuances of the juntas. The retribution stoked renewed rebellion, which, combined with a weakened Spain, made possible a successful rebellion led by the Venezuelan-born Simon Bolívar, who finally proclaimed independence in 1819. The pro-Spanish resistance was defeated in 1822 in the present territory of Colombia and in 1823 in Venezuela. 107, 108, 109. During the Independence War, between 250 and 400,000 people died, 12% of the pre-war population.
The territory of the Viceroyalty of New Granada became the Republic of Colombia, organized as a union of the current territories of Colombia, Panama, Ecuador, Venezuela, parts of Guyana and Brazil, and north of Marañón River. The Congress of Cúcuta in 1821 adopted a constitution for the new republic. Simon Bolívar became the first president of Colombia, and Francisco de Paula Santander was made vice president. 116. However, the new republic was unstable and the Gran Colombia ultimately collapsed. Modern Colombia comes from one of the countries that emerged after the dissolution of Gran Colombia, the other two being Ecuador and Venezuela. Colombia was the first constitutional government in South America, and the liberal and conservative parties, founded in 1848 and 1849, respectively, are two of the oldest surviving political parties in the Americas. Slavery was abolished in the country in 1851. Internal political and territorial divisions led to the dissolution of Gran Colombia in 1830. The so-called Department of Cundinamarca adopted the name New Granada, which it kept until 1858, when it became the Confederation Granadina. After a two-year civil war in 1863, the United States of Colombia was created, which became known as the Republic of Colombia in 1886. Internal divisions remained between the bipartisan political forces, occasionally igniting very bloody civil wars, the most significant being the Thousand Days War, 1899 to 1902, in which between 100 and 180,000 Colombians lost their lives when the Liberal Party, supported by Venezuela, Ecuador, Nicaragua, and Guatemala, rebelled against the nationalist government and took control of Santander, ultimately being defeated in 1902 by nationalist forces.
Colombia and Peru went to war because of territory disputes far in the Amazon basin. The war ended with a peace deal brokered by the League of Nations. The League finally awarded the disputed area to Colombia in June 1934. Soon after, Colombia achieved some degree of political stability, which was interrupted by a bloody conflict that took place between the late 1940s and the early 1950s, a period known as the violence. Its cause was mainly mounting tensions between the two leading political parties, which subsequently ignited after the assassination of the liberal presidential candidate Jorge Elisa Gaitan on the 9th of April 1948. The ensuing riots in Bogotá, known as El Bogotazo, spread throughout the country and claimed the lives of at least 180,000 Colombians. Colombia entered the Korean War when Laureano Gómez was elected president. It was the only Latin American country to join the war in a direct military role as an ally of the United States. Particularly important was the resistance of the Colombian troops at Old Baldy. The violence between the two political parties decreased first when Gustavo Rojas deposed the president of Colombia in a coup d'état and negotiated with the guerrillas, and then under the military junta of General Gabriel Paris.
After Rojas' deposition, the Colombian Conservative Party and the Colombian Liberal Party agreed to create the National Front, a coalition that would jointly govern the country. Under the deal, the presidency would alternate between conservatives and liberals every 4 years for 16 years. The two parties would have parity in all other elective offices. The National Front ended La Violencia, and National Front administrations attempted to institute far-reaching social and economic reforms in cooperation with the Alliance for Progress. Despite the progress in certain sectors, many social and political problems continued, and guerrilla groups were formally created such as the FARC, the ELN, and the M19 to fight the government and political apparatus. Since the 1960s, the country has suffered from an asymmetric low-intensity armed conflict between government forces, leftist guerrilla groups and right-wing paramilitaries. The conflict escalated in the 1990s, mainly in remote rural areas. Since the beginning of the armed conflict, human rights defenders have fought for the respect for human rights, despite staggering opposition. Several guerrillas organizations decided to demobilize after peace negotiations in 1989 to 1994. The United States has been heavily involved in the conflict since its beginnings, when in the early 1960s the US government encouraged the Colombian military to attack leftist militias in rural Colombia. This was part of the US fight against communism. Mercenaries and multinational corporations such as Chiquita Brands International are some of the international actors that have contributed to the violence of the conflict. Beginning in the mid-1970s, Colombian drug cartels became major producers, processors, and exporters of illegal drugs, primarily marijuana and cocaine. On the 4th of July 1991, a new constitution was promulgated. The changes generated by the new constitution are viewed as positive by Colombian society.
Colombia is ethnically diverse. Its people descending from the original native inhabitants, Spanish conquistadors, Africans originally brought to the country as slaves, and 20th century immigrants from Europe and Middle East. All contributing to a diverse cultural heritage. The demographic distribution reflects a pattern that is influenced by colonial history. Whites live throughout the country, mainly in urban centers, burgeoning highland and coastal cities. The populations of the major cities also include mestizos. Mestizo campesinos, people living in rural areas, also live in the Andean highlands where some Spanish conquerors mixed with the women of Amerindian chiefdoms. Mestizos include artisans and small tradesmen who have played a major part in the urban expansion of recent decades. In a study by American Journal of Physical Anthropology, Colombians have an average ancestry of 47% Amerindian DNA, 42% European DNA, and 11% African DNA.
Many of the indigenous peoples experienced a reduction in population during the Spanish rule, and many others were absorbed into the mestizo population, but the remainder currently represent over 80 distinct cultures. Reserves, rescados, established for indigenous peoples occupy 30,570,000 hectares, 27% of the country's area, and are inhabited by more than 800,000 people. Some of the largest indigenous groups are Waya, Poes, Pastos, Embera, and Zenu. La Guajira, Cauca, Narino, Córdoba, and Sucre have the largest indigenous populations. The organization Nacional Indigena de Colombia, founded in 1982, is an organization representing the indigenous peoples of Colombia. Sub-Saharan Africans were brought as slaves, mostly to the coastal lowlands, beginning early in the 16th century and continuing into 19th century. Large Afro-Colombian communities are found today on the Pacific coast. Numerous Jamaicans migrated mainly to the islands of San Andres and Providencia. Several Europeans and North Americans migrated to the country in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, including people from the former USSR during and after the Second World War. Many immigrant communities settled on the Caribbean coast, in particular recent immigrants from the Middle East and Europe. Barranquilla, largest city of Colombian Caribbean, and other Caribbean cities have the largest populations of Lebanese, Palestinian, and other Levantines. There are also important communities of Romanis and Jews. There is a major migration trend of Venezuelans, due to the political and economic situation in Venezuela. In August 2019, Colombia offered citizenship to more than 24,000 children of Venezuelan refugees who were born in Colombia.
Colombia has a high crime rate due to being a center for cultivation and trafficking of cocaine. The Colombian conflict began in the mid-1960s as a low-intensity conflict between Colombian governments, paramilitary groups, crime syndicates, and left-wing guerrillas such as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia and National Liberation Army, fighting each other to increase their influence in Colombian territory. All the armed groups have been involved in drug trafficking. In a country where state capacity was weak in some regions, the result was a grinding war on multiple fronts, with civilian population caught in between and often deliberately targeted for collaborating. Human rights advocates blame paramilitaries for massacres, disappearances, and cases of torture and forced displacement. Rebel groups are behind assassinations, kidnapping, and extortion. In 2011, President Juan Manuel Santos launched the Borders for Prosperity plan to fight poverty and combat violence from illegal armed groups along Colombia's borders through social and economic development. The plan received praise from the International Crisis Group. Colombia registered a homicide rate of 24 per 100,000 in 2016, the lowest since 1974. The 40-year low in murders came the same year the government signed a peace agreement with the FARC. Since the beginning of the crisis in Venezuela and mass emigration of Venezuelans during Venezuelan refugee crisis, desperate Venezuelans recruited into gangs in order to survive by other Venezuelan gang members. Many Venezuelan prisoners released from Venezuelan prisons by Maduro. Gang groups from Venezuela have also migrated to Colombia and other countries.